Backpack Broadcasting continues to bring you the best original sports content, but now you can get more of the content you love. For as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus content, including behind-the-scenes footage and interviews from the Sports Walk, Sideline Stories, or the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. All this exclusive content comes via Patreon. There are tiered levels of patronage, and each Backpack Broadcasting patron receives exclusive perks. Your support helps Backpack Broadcasting create more of the original content that you love. Visit Backpack Broadcasting's Patreon page and become a patron today. Hard to Tell Podcast, episode 196. Dexter Henry, Brian Fonseca here. Brian,
196. 196. You know what that means?
All Brian does is get excited every time the numbers get higher, which happens every podcast. So, you should be kind of used to it already. The numbers are just only going to go up.
We'll be at 200 by the holidays, which excites me very, very much.
Anybody watching this podcast can see that.
As we're looking to take this podcast into the next phase of what Dexter and I envision it should be, where it could become. We're trying to organize some stuff around that. That also comes with our sort of own elevation where, I don't want to spoil you saying it, but you're bringing back a Backpack Broadcasting favorites. And then I'll just say this off the top of the show. If you saw it on Twitter, I'm going to be doing some stuff with FanDuel and moving forward as a host digitally for some things and things like that. Probably be talking NBA combat sports. But that's not sort of the final destination, though, because, nothing I'm doing right now is full time, which, has its positives and negatives. So I'm hoping in due time that I won't be the only one there who is new that I know from my stable of people. So, but in due time, we should be able to build something out there nice. But as of now, I'm excited about that. And from what I understand, Dexter has some news as well.
Yeah, I got some news. I don't think it's major. Brian talked about me bringing back a favorite for the Backpack Broadcasting family and people alike. It's been a couple years. I had worked on an award-winning web series, The Sports Walk. It is back. And so I really encourage you guys to check it out. The first episode that is out will feature our producer of the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast, Gregory Alcala. I agree. I encourage everybody to check it out because Greg talks about his Knicks fandom.
I have it queued up. I'm going to watch it tonight.
His experience as a Knicks fan, which I think is very interesting because, I posted a clip of Greg before we recorded this podcast of him talking about it. He talks about how his Knicks fandom, to quote Greg said it was trash. And I think why I encourage people to watch this one, especially if you're someone like me who's a little bit older as a Knicks fan, is I don't think we think about enough about people who are, were born in the mid to late 90s. They didn't really get to see a lot of good Knicks basketball. And so you hear this from Greg and his experience and, what it was like watching Knicks last year. And so I encourage everybody to watch that. We have some other good episodes that'll be coming out too. So I encourage that. Season 4, unbelievably season 4. We're doing this. It kicks off this week. And, I hope people enjoy it and get to see Greg's episode and get to kind of, you've seen Greg here on the podcast. You also seen him on the NBA Exchange with me. So he was perfect to do this. And yeah, man, it's good. Hopefully people check that out. We appreciate that. The Sports Walk is a really fun show. I love producing it. And actually, Greg, to give Greg credit, Greg is also will be shooting some of these episodes and help me produce it too. He helped me work on the second episode, which I think is a fun one too. And it has some NBA ties with an event we ended up at. So I think people will like that as well too. So Sports Walk, go support Brian on FanDuel. That's some new stuff that we have going out. We got a really good podcast today. We're going to talk about some combat sports, which will make Brian excited in a second. We also have a freelance writer to talk about some things in hip hop around album length, something that Brian and I have discussed. We have that coming up. First, we got to talk about the fight over the weekend. Heavyweight fight was Wilder Fury 3. And man, look, I don't say this too many times. Brian gets excited about this kind of stuff more than I do. But this was good. This was good, and this was entertaining, and it was really, really damn good. I mean, we have talked, and Brian and I have spoken about this. I bring back Brian, Greg, so we can see Brian on this. Brian and I have talked about this a lot in terms of maybe this was maybe 3-4 years ago, maybe when we started the podcast. We talked about the heavyweight division being down, and we needed to see some stuff in the heavyweight division and some more excitement. And look, there's been excitement. And I remember Brian and I doing a podcast 4 years ago where we talked about we wanted to see Wilder and Joshua fight. And that hasn't happened. And let's just say this, the heavyweight division has not gone the way that we thought it was going to go. And in fact, I was the one who said on the record, I thought Joshua would win that match, and Joshua has not looked good.
A lot of people did. I still don't, by the way. We'll get to that a little bit.
We'll get to that a little bit later. But Wilder Fury was good. If you haven't been under a rock or you did not see, Tyson Fury won this fight. And look, I was rooting for Wilder because I root for everybody black. Had to do that. I was rooting for Wilder. But considering what we saw in the first match, considering what we saw in the second match, Wilder looked exhausted and Fury, gave him the business. Brian, I want to go into this because you talked about this on the last episode. And you talked about how you liked Fury to win. If you were betting, this is where you would go. And I agreed with you and all of that. And we also agreed that if Wilder was going to win this, it had to happen via a knockout. He had to bring the power, right? He had to bring the power. And this is what we knew. But we also, I think, agreed that if this was going to go a lengthy amount of rounds, that Wilder was going to have to fight a bit better technically. We agreed that. As I think the boxing lovers that we are, we agreed that this had to happen. And I want to start with this. Wilder comes out the gate, and he's looking pretty good technically. He's mixing up the jab. He's got blows to the body. He's keeping his distance before he comes in with the power. I'm like, okay, all right, we got something here.
However,
to quote the great Mike Tyson.
Yes, this is exactly where I was going to go.
Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I mean, that quote is just great for life. It's just absolutely great for life in general. But everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
That's exactly where I was going to go there. This is exactly what I was going to go.
Great minds think alike. Well, that's exactly where Tyson Fury went. And he hit Deontay Wilder. And you could just see that was like, all right. And the plan changed. The plan changed for Wilder. If you want the plan changed, please explain for the people, Brian, how the plan changed for Wilder, because he was not the same fighter, in my opinion, that we saw in the first 2 rounds for the rest of this fight after he got stunned and punched in the face. And somewhere Mike Tyson was smiling like, told y'all.
This is some of your best analysis ever, first of all.
Really?
Seriously,
okay.
Like, this is brilliant. I was thinking the same exact, and it was perfect. Like, it was perfect. Deontay Wilder, I thought, won those first 2 rounds. Some people debate.
No, I agree. I thought he did
some
too.
people debate round 2, I think, in particular, but I thought he won both those rounds. It's a moot point at this point. What I saw, and Greg, keep the camera on both of us so I could see the Dexter's sort of reaction, and I know he's going to jump in here at some point. I think Deontay Wilder won the first 2 rounds, and we saw him coming out, jabs to the body, straights to the body even, and trying to establish something. I was live tweeting like crazy if you were following me. I was like, look, it's nice that Deontay Wilder's doing this because I've been wanting him to do this because he's too much of a headhunter. However, he's telegraphing it a little too much. Tyson Fury is way too smart. He's going to download that information, as we like to say in boxing, and he's going to start picking him off and countering him with left hooks inside as soon as Deontay Wilder lunges in, check left hook, boom, boom, boom. And you started to see that happen, as the fight progressed, because Deontay Wilder was telegraphing it. Once he got rocked for good, for real, rather, in the 3rd round, for the first time in the fight, the body work, that shit was done. Like, that shit was mostly abandoned from there. Because, as Dexter said, everybody has a plan till you get punched in the mouth. And when Deontay Wilder got punched in the mouth, he just went back to what he knew. He's like, all right, fine. We'll see. We'll see what happens here. They're moving forward. And It's so funny. I'm going on BoxRec right now just to get the actual scores at the time that the fight was done. Deontay Wilder did get knocked out in the 11th round. However, he did not go away quietly at all.
No.
You look it up, and the sentence on BoxRec here is this: Wilder down in rounds 3, 10, and 11. Fury down twice in round 4. That sounds like a classic to me. And when you watch it, two of the 3 fights were a classic, and that's the thing. Boxing trilogies don't happen very often because they just wear on
Correct.
people. There are not a lot of fights that people want to see rematches of, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, you could argue and convincingly that Tyson Fury won all 3 times, but goddamn, Deontay Wilder came very close twice. The first fight, he nearly knocked him out in the 12th round in dramatic fashion, and it was fight of the year candidate, maybe the fight of the year that year. It's definitely the most memorable fight from that year. And then this year, like, this is probably the most memorable fight of this year
Oh
that
yeah.
we're going to be talking about to this point. Like, you can't convincingly point me in another direction in terms of like what's a more memorable fight than this that we've seen this year. We'll see what Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter do next month, because that is the next fight that I'm really excited about. Canelo Alvarez and Caleb Plant, not as much because I think Canelo's going to wash him, but it'll be great to see Canelo again. That said, scorecards 94-92, 95-91, 95-92, all in favor of Tyson Fury at the time of the knockout. Sounds about right to me. Sounds a little bit closer than I would have thought off the top of my head.
It's a little
But
closer for me than I would have thought off the top of my
but
head.
Deontay Wilder did win rounds 1 and 2, in my opinion, and did win round 4, which is where he knocked him down. Now, here's the thing:
Twice.
Deontay Wilder got knocked down in round 3, got up, and it didn't look great. Like, round 3, at the very beginning, you could watch and you can see his legs
Hmm.
not really as steady. It's like all the movement, because Deontay Wilder was different in rounds 1 and 2. He was moving around a lot, fighting in a way that we're not accustomed to seeing. And it's important to note that his new trainer, Malik Scott, is somebody that Deontay Wilder actually fought and beat, knocked him out in the first round 7 years ago. Malik Scott was one of these heavyweights who he retired at 38, 3-1 with 13 knockouts only. So he's a heavyweight who's a counterpuncher. He's a heavyweight who moves around a lot, et cetera, et cetera. So evidently he was trying to tell Deontay Wilder, like, yo, this is what you have to do. And it was working in the beginning until it wasn't. And then Deontay
Until it
Wilder back
wasn't.
to being Deontay Wilder. Then he drops Tyson Fury in round 4 twice. Twice. And
Well,
then I stood up. I was like, oh my God, like, this is crazy. Like, it was literally Dex, like a fight night fight. Like in a video game where like Deontay Wilder is fighting like how I am in fight night when I'm fighting somebody better, and I'm like, yo, I just have to get him, because if this goes to distance, I'm not gonna have the stamina, et cetera, et cetera. And he gets dropped early, and then I drop him in round 4, and then it goes, and then I'm getting picked apart, and I'm getting pissed, and I'm flailing my arms and losing my stamina, and then eventually get dropped in round 11. But
now
goddamn, what a fight!
what I wanted to say there, what's impressive is I think people that Brian captured that Brian's 100% right about in round 3. You watch his legs; it's not looking good. He's not moving the same. The fact that in round 4 he came back and caught him to the side of the face, wasn't super clean twice, that got Tyson down. And the second one, Tyson looked a little bit stunned. Like he was like, oh, okay. Like, and you can almost see in Fury, he kind of realized, like, oh, yo, he knew that Wilder had to go for it in that way. And this is where Brian talks about the downloading information, the term you hear in boxing, and he had to adjust. And you saw some adjustments from Fury in the next couple of rounds. Fury was relentlessly attacking. He's getting him, he's catching him. But this is what was impressive to me the whole time. And I think I texted Brian this. I couldn't believe Wilder was standing. I could not believe it at all whatsoever. I mean, we talk about heart in boxing, we talk about a chin. His face was messed up, bleeding eventually from the mouth, and he took some hits. But the fact that Wilder was even standing, and then even in some of the later rounds, particularly in rounds 8 and 9, where you still saw Wilder taking some shots, and then he would come back with some hooks.
Tyson Fury.
And rocking Tyson Fury a couple of times, including one he caught him with an uppercut. I think it was at the end of the 8th. He caught him with an uppercut, and I was like, how is he still finding it? So what I take from it, obviously, he eventually gets knocked out in the 11th round. We saw that. It was not a good-looking knockout. Head hits the ropes, down to the ground. Yeah. Wilder was done. There were times where Wilder looked like he was sleeping when the fighters would come together. He's resting on Fury. He looked like he wanted to go to sleep, but the man didn't sleep. You got to give that man a ton of credit for hanging in there, fighting. He knew what the only way that he could win, and it was the way Brian and I talked about this before, that he had to get a knockout, and Wilder was trying for that He just, to be honest, had nothing left by the end. There was nothing left. And, he ended up getting knocked out. So I do think this fight is the embodiment of that Tyson quote. But what
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, B,
Hmm.
as we wrap this, you know, the end of the fight, and I know you saw it, Tyson Fury comes over to Wilder to congratulate him. And Wilder doesn't want to congratulate him. He pretty much waves him off, tells him to get up out of here. Do you have a problem with that? Uh, you know,
It's tough because like this is a little bit different. Like I would like to think in that situation that I'd be receptive to the guy now as an adult, but like I mean, in a competitive sport in boxing, like I know how I would have handled that at like 16 years old, 18 years old.
oh, I thought you were going to say 16 days ago.
Like I no, I know how I would have handled that. It's as like a teenager playing competitive sports, not even at a very high level. Playing like basketball or whatever, or like if somebody tried to shake my hand after beating me in a race, you know what I mean? Like I don't, like I probably wouldn't have been, very warm, in return. So it's difficult because like it's boxing. It's Deontay Wilder is one of the most prideful heavyweights probably that we've ever seen, is somebody who has knocked out every single person he stepped in the ring with except Tyson Fury. Bermain Stavern, he beat him by decision, but then he ended up knocking him out in the rematch.
Mm-hmm.
Really knocking him out in the rematch. Um, like this is somebody who, like, look at his character, look at where he's came from, and look at all the things he's had to endure to get to this point. And you talk about that warrior spirit, that warrior attitude. Like, it's very difficult to sort of like take in all that and then just shake the hand of a guy who y'all have been cussing each other out, y'all legitimately don't like each other, etc., etc. Now usually what happens in boxing, or more often than not what happens in boxing and combat sports in general, is like after you compete against somebody, sure, like afterwards, you guys or women have been to this war together. Y'all are the only two who know what this is like out of the people in this arena, most of the people in the arena, so you guys would have some respect after that. Oftentimes you'll see that, but I'm actually surprised it doesn't happen more often, that guys don't want to shake hands or whatever the case may be. So I understand it from a heat of the moment thing. I do hope that Deontay Wilder like sort of makes amends behind the scenes, but he doesn't need to. He's a fighter at the end of the day. And even if he doesn't fight Tyson Fury ever again, which I don't think he should necessarily, um he can be the heavyweight champion again, because there's like 4 or 5 heavyweight championships, and I still think he can beat every other heavyweight in the world. Even now, he's 35 years old, and he was a late starter. But I'm not watching Anthony Joshua lose to Alexander Usyk, who beat him for the other heavyweight championships, and then watching Deontay Wilder lose to Tyson Fury. And I'm not coming away saying Deontay Wilder's going to lose to Anthony Joshua. I'm
No,
saying that Deontay Wilder still knocks him out, like I've been saying for years. I think that Deontay Wilder will beat Andy Ruiz. I think he'll beat, well, Alexander Povetkin's retired, but I think that he'll beat, Carlos Takam. Who did Alexander Usyk just beat? Was it Derek Chisora? Like Deontay Wilder would beat a lot of these dudes. So I'm not even worried about that necessarily. And in terms of being down on the cards, I just wanted to go through his career trajectory sort of one more time. Both times where he stopped Luis Ortiz, he was down on the
he was down the
cards.
cards, especially that second time. The second one,
Right.
what a shot he delivered there to
But
win that
but
fight.
it's like it really doesn't matter if you have. It's like fighting Isaac Frost in Fight Night. Legitimately, Isaac Frost, who's from Fight Night champion, that came out 10 years ago, and he's like Deontay Wilder's size. And I think the character is actually based on Randy Orton, which is fucking fascinating. But Isaac Frost is like this 6'7" white dude who's like built like Deontay Wilder essentially, and he's the boss, the final boss battle in Fight Night Champion if you're in the story mode. And basically, it's like you can win, or you could win your little rounds against him, but he's gonna come get you at some point, right? Like that's the whole thing. That's what fighting Deontay Wilder is like. Like you can win rounds because the entire time he is looking for that opening where he can land one of the best right hands we've ever seen in the sport of boxing. And against everybody else prior to now, he's
done it.
landed it. You know what I mean? Even against Tyson Fury, he did. Tyson Fury just got up when it didn't look like he was going to. Dominic Brazil, I think. No, that was a 1-round knockout. Never mind. Um, Gerald Washington, I think was outboxing him a little bit, but it didn't matter. Deontay Wilder knocked him out in the 5th round. Like there are other fights throughout his career, not a ton, but there are other examples throughout his career you could find where like he was down on the cards and it didn't quite matter because he's just gonna knock guys out. And for a while, he was just knocking people out in the 1st round anyway, so it really didn't matter. I think Deontay Wilder is still that dude, and I think he needs to be respected for where he's gone in his career. He turned
Oh,
pro. He turned pro after winning a bronze medal after being a late starter. He was boxing for like 3 or 4 years or something like that. And then he was knocking people out, within the first 4 rounds for many, many years until the Bermane-Stavern fight where he won the heavyweight title in 2015. And I think that went to decision because I think he like hurt his hand or broke his hand or something like that. Because in the rematch, it didn't matter. He knocked him out 3 times in the 1st round. And what bums me out, and this is the last thing I'll say on this text, what bums me out is that, and I knew this at the time because I actually wrote about this even at the time, this is like 2015, 16. I knew he was going to be underappreciated until it was too late in his career. Not that it's too late now because he still has some years left if he wants it. But people talk about what happened to the heavyweight division, where's the next great American heavyweight, et cetera, et cetera. And the great American heavyweights were right here. Like Deontay Wilder was right here when the Klitschko brothers were taking over. Like he's somebody who came up and won WBC heavyweight title. But in boxing today, we're just so like we just want to pick guys apart for not being perfect. And I think that really hurts the sport among many other things. It's like people just want to pick guys apart for not being perfect. We had this guy right here who knocked out everybody he's ever fought until Tyson Fury, who had the punching power of a heavyweight, who was always exciting, who gave really good interviews, who was personable. Anytime I've interviewed Deontay Wilder, I've really enjoyed it, or been in a press room with him, I've really enjoyed it. You know what I mean? Like, he seems like a good guy in real life, a friendly guy in real life, and he's a boxer, so he's naturally complicated. But like, this is somebody who's right here from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, came up the hard way, has a daughter with spina bifida, I think it's called, or I may be botching that, but has like a condition that he's taking care of her, and became the heavyweight champion of the world. And I don't feel like he was truly embraced the way he should have. And I think that maybe now he'll start to get his just due, but now he lost. So I don't know if he, in fact, will.
I think you're right about that, and I think to put a bow on this, there's two ways. There's many ways to look at this. Tyson Fury is a fantastic fighter, and he's just been the better fighter. There's no doubt about that. As you said, Wilder's had something for everybody except for Fury. That will be part of his story. That will be part of his legacy. But it should be not what defines him as a boxer at all whatsoever. He's done a lot of great stuff. I think Brian makes great points about him being underappreciated as American heavyweight champion. But I think when it comes to just American exceptionalism, a lot of fans expect that when it comes to that, we should dominate the world. And if you don't do that, then you are not successful. I think there are great points Brian made on that. But there's one lesson learned from this fight. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face or the mouth. Things to take with you in life. You can learn a lot from the sport of boxing. I'm sure Brian will agree with that. Colin Kaepernick.
Women's boxing.
Puerto Rico. As everyone knows, on this podcast, we talk a lot of sports and hip hop. And recently I came across a really good article that had me thinking about something that Brian and I have discussed a ton about in hip hop, which is the length of albums. And we thought it was really good. This was written by Adam Aziz, freelance writer. He joins us now. We're going to talk about that article and a lot more in hip hop. Adam, what's up, man?
Guys?
How you doing?
Good, guys. What's going on?
Ain't much, man. Glad you are up good and well up in the six in
cool.
Toronto.
Yes, sir.
Glad you are doing well. So we will, whenever we have journalists on here, we get a sports journalist, you know, as you yourself, you write about music and a bunch of other things. We like to ask people just how they got into the journalism game. Tell us about your background, how people can know about, you know, what you do, and just how'd you get into this writing game?
Oh man, I'm an old head, man. Buckle up. I'll try to go fast, but no, I back in 1996, believe it or not, I started one of the first like kind of online hip hop publications. It was an email newsletter, and then published that for about 10 years, and then went to work with Tip Ti for a while. You know, got to write with a bunch of different folks, and then obviously found my way into the freelance writing with Undefeated, OK Player, Vibe, Complex, a bunch of others. Obviously inspired by a lot of the, you know, great hip hop writers from back in the day. And yeah, man. So that's like 20 plus years condensed into like 20 seconds. But you know, definitely got to work with cool folks over the years. You know, worked with Spit Kicker for a while. So that was when you know, Chappelle and Kanye and De La were all part of Spit Kicker. And so yeah, man. Yeah, lots of cool stuff over the years, and yeah, doing a lot of writing lately for you know, a bunch of publications on the sports and music side. So.
Well, let me tell you this, man. As somebody who is nearing 40 years old in a couple years, when you start to do more in your career, it does take long to tell that story, but it's not a bad thing, man. It means you've done some things. It means you've done some things, so it's not bad. So as I was telling the listeners, you know, I came across your article, which was called "The Coming Battle Over Rap Album Lengths" that you wrote for the Undefeated. And, you know, luckily enough, I followed you, you know, I reached out to you and you agreed to come on here and talk to us. So I found that this was a very interesting article because you talked about the history of music where streaming made track lists longer. Will this trend be reversed by TikTok? There was a lot to go in, but I guess the first question I have for you on this, Adam, is what gave you the inspiration to write this? Because it's something I've talked about, Brian spoke about for a while, which is that we tend to believe the classic albums, the great albums in hip hop generally are tighter albums. So what inspired you to write this story?
I mean, I think that's what it was, right? I mean, I think it came from the standpoint of quality, you know, versus, you know, hard and fast to the amount of tracks, you know, on an album. And I think what I think back to is like, what's the last classic, you know, hip hop album that came out? And for me, you know, that's 444, right? And, you know, this is Hove in 2017, which is kind of a incredible unto itself. But you're talking about 10 tracks, you know, a tight 36 minutes. And then you look at that, you know, in contrast to like, you know, the last Migos album that dropped, or almost any, you know, project that comes out today outside of a select few. And you're talking about, you know, 15, 17, you know, 20 plus tracks. I mean, a good example is, you know, Donda and, you know, CLB. And I wrote about that, you know, in the article, which was, you know, there were great albums there, I think, but, you know, they needed to be kind of condensed down into the best of the, you know, best of the best. And then if you look back at, you know, classic hip hop albums, you know, Blueprint, Illmatic, you know, bunch of, you know, almost, you know, every J album with the exception of maybe, you know, Blueprint 2, you know, they're tighter affairs, right? And the quality, you know, speaks for it. So, I mean, I think that's what it was. It was around, you know, remembering that, you know, quality was the kind of first and foremost consideration in the production of albums back in the day versus, you know, trying to serve a streaming strategy.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, I would say my ideal sweet spot, Adam, just to give you some context for what I'm about to say, my ideal sweet spot for an album is similar to Dexter's. It'll be like 10, 12 records, maybe 14 tops. and probably between 30 to 40 at the absolute most, like 45 minutes of music. Like when you mentioned what was the last great or last classic hip hop album, one album that came to mind for me personally was Bandana, that came out 2 years ago. Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, and that was 15 tracks, but like one of them is an intro skit, um, so it doesn't really count. And then it's 45 minutes, like right on the nose. And I'm actually surprised that we're seeing a trend of very little in between, where you have the Vince Staples example that you used. And even FM before that was also another album that was like 20 something minutes or whatever the case may be. And then you have other extreme examples. Like I'm forgetting who it was, Dex, but somebody dropped an album recently, like a bigger name. And then I looked up the track list and it was like 20 something songs. And I was like, oh, no way. No way, I'm not doing
Yeah,
this.
I'm trying to think. I probably had some of those reactions where I might have been. And does that happen for you? Does that happen for you, Adam? In what Brian just said, where you might, and you listen to music, hip hop a lot, like we do, and you review and you talk about it. But does that happen to you too, where you might look at an artist and you see 20 tracks and you're like, no, I don't know about this?
Oh, I mean, all the time, right? I mean, like every like new release Friday, right? I mean, like, my whole thing is like, I look at it kind of like this, right? So if you look at a sports example, right, it's like, you'll have a dude that's hitting 200 with 28 home runs and like 70 RBIs. So I mean, the whole thing about that is, he's just going to keep swinging, right? And eventually he's gonna hit something, right? It doesn't mean that he's having a good season, right? So I liken the albums, kind of that way, right? I mean, there's probably good to be found on the majority of albums that drop, but it doesn't make it a good, project. And then I guess the question becomes, around that is like, are albums themselves like even relevant, anymore? And my argument there is like, they are, and I'll tell you when we're going to see that next. And it's not a hip hop example, but when Adele drops, in a few weeks, I mean, she's probably going to do like crazy, like insane numbers. And I heard that she's even demanding that everything's like available like on physical form too, because she's going to be able to move those units. But the reality of it is people are still going to be listening to that 3 years from now, right? And I would argue that the percentage of albums that you're going to go back to that drop this year in the next 3 or 4 years is just like so small, right? Like I don't even know, like, is it 5% of the albums that drop this year you're going to go back to in 3 or 4 years? I mean, that seems actually roughly the right amount to me.
I don't think it's that high. Actually,
yeah, I mean, I know you might be right.
As you think about, like, especially like this year, especially kind of like last year, got off to a very slow start. But there haven't been, even between Dex and I, like I would say between this year, it's definitely lower than last year and the year before in terms of how many albums we're recommending to each other. Yo, check this out. I recommend him like AJ Tracy recently. He's recommended me Dave, both UK artists, but like there was a lot more of that, I would say, in 2019 and prior. And this brings me to something that you mentioned in your story. This was a quote from Brian Zisuk. I hope I'm saying that name right?
Yeah, Z from Audio Mac.
Yeah, Z from Audio Mac, basically. And he said, I think we could eventually start seeing more singles deals and contracts structured around what makes sense in today's marketplace. Many of these artists finding fame through TikTok or social media don't necessarily have an album, let alone multiple albums in them. So I'm wondering, is that a trend we're going to start seeing? And are guys and girls, are artists just going to not make as many albums as they used to?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it depends on who's still recording, right? Like I don't think the Kendricks of the world, the Nas, the Jays.
No. They're gonna always make, they're always gonna make albums.
But I think for upstart
just people
artists
breaking in, upstart artists.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes back. I mean, I've written about this a few times. I mean, I think the whole there's gonna be a whole evolution of what it means to be a recording artist, right? And I think what I mean by that is this idea of that. The music industry is a path to riches and all the fortune you can ever have, I think will really change, right? And I think that there's going to be pockets of money to be made, but they are probably going to be in the structure of like singles deals, a low risk deals for the labels, because I mean, to invest in an artist and have them create a full project, I think Z's right, is like the capability to do that today of the current artist makeup, not considering the kind of legends in the game, is probably not there, right? I mean, so yeah, absolutely, I think that's going to happen. I think the other thing is, music needs to figure out another channel for discovery other than TikTok too, right? Because ultimately, it seems like what always happens, right, is that whatever the new thing is, the music bid just kind of puts all their eggs in the basket, right? So like, when there was downloads, right? When people were buying MP3 downloads, that's what it was, right? Like everything went to that was it, right? Like we're going to, and then streaming came. So it's all streaming. And now TikTok, right? So like how many songs have you discovered off of TikTok? I know I've discovered, tons, off of there, right? And it's great. But it's following the same path, the business has always followed, as it just goes to whatever the next tech or whatever the next thing is without actually innovating. Because if you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, the music business itself has not really innovated ever, really, right? With the exception of jumping from, cassettes to CDs, right? So all of that, it's reactionary. All of that evolution is coming from tech, right? So I think to the question, it's like, it is probably going to, go that way, unless the labels want to invest in creating lifelong artists, but they don't want to do that anymore, right? Like that's what happened back in the day, right? Like A&R, like the A&R department was actually about going out and finding like undiscovered talent and developing them over the course of a career. Now it's really about looking at data and using algorithms to determine what the lowest risk investment is and how quickly you can turn a profit on the signing, which I get it, right? Like it's a business, but I'm saying if you're talking about a long-term strategy, that isn't it, I don't think.
Oh man, Dex, I'm getting triggered because I'm sensing like the parallels between this and like our industry in terms media, of like the lack of investing in people, the sort of shorter term deals, and all this shit. Like, oh my god, I'm telling you, all these things are connected. Everything
they're all connected. Adam, because you explained this in your piece, and I wanted you to explain it to listeners. So for us, because you and I, we're a little older, and Brian's younger.
Oh.
We know.
I wish, man. I wish.
we know what it was like to purchase physical CDs for rap albums.
I do too.
You do too. You just transitioned a little bit earlier into that. And this isn't really about the physical, but what I'm asking you, but could you talk a little bit about what the impact streaming has had on the length of albums that we have seen? Because you talked a little about it earlier and how a lot of the albums, whether it was mid-90s, late 90s, early 2000s, had a certain length. And now with streaming, the lengths of these albums are different that we're seeing. Yeah. So could you just talk about the impact of streaming on hip-hop album lengths?
Yeah, I think what Mac, shout out to Mac Main, said in the article, which was, when Wayne was releasing the last Carter album, he hadn't actually released an album in sort of the peak of the streaming era, right? And basically the advice people were giving to Mac Main is you got to load up the project, with as many songs as possible to essentially, boost streaming, right? So, here's someone that, someone, super talented, been around the industry for many, many years, and was coming into this, spot where, the advice was essentially just, it obviously Mac and Wayne had a lens to quality, but sort of the advice coming from the business side, I guess, was, you got to pump as many songs as you can onto the project to essentially boost streaming. So I think that didn't happen back in the day, right? Because artists would be paid, I think the example that I gave in the article was Jay with Blueprint, right? Is Jay didn't want to put more songs on Blueprint because he wasn't getting paid beyond the certain songs that he was obligated to provide in the recording contract, right? So that's how it used to work, is right. You have to deliver 12 or 13 songs for this project, or 14 songs. You're not getting paid for any more songs beyond that. You can throw a couple on there, but ultimately it's just a label that's gonna probably benefit in the end. So back then there wasn't this pressure to like load up the project because it was a CD sale, that mattered, rather than a collective of streams that equated to an album sale that equated to, it's all like, the equation has gotten more complicated, now. And one part of that equation is, if you're an artist that's not confident in your ability to, drive a lot of streams off a certain amount of tracks, if you put 24 songs on a project, I mean, we could probably drop an album and have one song that people would like, right? Or two songs that people would like. It's just like, you got to throw some stuff on the wall and see what sticks. And then hopefully something sticks enough that you can generate a certain amount of streams. But this whole approach now obviously deprioritizes quality significantly, because it's just not really about, it is and it isn't, right, about quality. Obviously, the quality side of it is, if you put out 20 great songs, people are likely going to stream it a lot longer. I mean, we see the example with, CLB right now, is that, it's still like, hanging around on the top of the charts. And overall, it's a pretty good project, right? It's a little long, but there's quality there. Same with Donda, right? There's quality there. But you're talking about two artists that, are able to produce quality music. And it's just like, it's very easy to see that, a lot of these artists that are getting signed off of, TikTok and getting signed off of, viral singles and stuff like that, do not have the, unfortunately don't have the talent to create like long cohesive projects and a large number of quality tracks. So, I think that's where, it's kind of skewing things right now.
So with that being said, I have this feeling that we don't get as many. I think people like to romanticize the 90s to some degree, right? And be like, oh, the golden era, everybody was dropping classics, which, like, let's be real, it wasn't true. Everybody was not doing that, right? That's not true at all whatsoever. But to your point, there did seem to be a more emphasis on quality, whether it was on the A&R side in terms of developing artists and artists who actually wanted to put together great cohesive albums. So I'm curious as to what you think, Adam. Do you think that we are seeing less classic or near classic hip hop albums created than we have before?
Oh yeah, I mean, like there's none, right? I'll give an example, right? I mean, I love, I love Griselda, I love Benny the Butcher, but I mean, the volume, of material coming out there is just like astronomical, right? And if you look back to it, like an example from like the '90s would be Wu-Tang, right? But the thing with Wu-Tang was like, when the group projects dropped, like Enter the 36 or Wu-Tang Forever, I mean, they were quality, right? And then when the solo projects would drop, they were largely quality, right? It wasn't like, Ghost and Ray weren't throwing out like 20 albums, a year or anything like that, right? I mean, there was a lot of Wu-related material coming out, but it was planful, and it was, well produced, and it was quality. And I think the thing now is that people are most concerned about is losing listener attention, right? Which totally makes sense, right? I think that's what's driving, a lot of the volume of material coming out. Like, if you drop something, this week on a Friday, I mean, keeping someone's attention for 2 more weeks is really hard, right? Like, I mean, forgetting just music, but you have sports, you have all the other entertainment streaming services, you have, even like looking at, like kind of COVID, as things are opening up again, people are less captive, right? So there's a whole new, realm of things going for people's attention. So it's just like, I think the biggest thing driving this is people are concerned about people forgetting about them, right? And that the thing is, back in the day, like, short of like No Limit Records, right? That was probably the best example of streaming.
That would be a good example.
Back in the day, right? I used to just I didn't really, the music, but I mean, I love the ads, the Pen and Pixel ads back in the day. But
yeah,
I just love opening the CD and seeing like 20 albums coming out in the next month or that. That was like jokes. But I mean, like, that was probably the best example of like the streaming flow of material, right? And then if you look outside of that, I mean, artists were kind of on that maybe like every other year cadence, once a year cadence, and features. It was a little more organic, right? I think the biggest thing you'll notice now is like the feel of all this is not organic anymore, right? Even the bigger artists, right? Like it feels a lot less organic, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I also feel like there was a formula before that people have since stopped following, where it would be, to your point, like an artist would come out with an album. The next year, they would mostly hop on other people's stuff and just do features. Right. Then they'll probably drop an album the year after, and then just sort of go. Like Nas was doing that for a while, throughout his career, because he would drop like every other year for a bit. And I'm wondering, like, because of this whole streaming thing, like, I think that we're probably going to see shorter albums come back to some degree. I think we've already have, but like we said, like there's not a lot of middle ground there. But are we gonna start to see like more of the Vince Staples show, like more Vince Staples albums where it's like 10 songs, 20 tracks, and it's like 2-minute songs that they want to obviously, they not him necessarily, but artists want you to repeat them so that their streaming numbers go up. And it's going to be a lot
Yeah.
more albums of like 27 Summers, but like 12 times over and over. Like if Nas came out with 27 Summers over and over, it wouldn't have stood out to me in that same way. And then it all just sort of blends together. So do you think that we're just going to see, shorter albums?
Yeah, I mean, I see you got like the 5 Mike shirt on, right? So like, I think it depends on, and Dexter's got the Esco Illmatic shirt on,
Yep,
so
Illmatic cover.
and I got big shirt on. I think it depends on like, I think it depends on I think we're talking like there's hip hop and then there's the music industry, right? And I think like, from a hip hop perspective, I think there's some advantage of like bringing back the quality into place. And I think the one good thing that we are seeing, and it's been sort of creeping up, over the past, call it like 5-6 years, is we're seeing like, lyricism and, production and that come back into play, right? With the Griseldas, obviously, Kendrick, and, there's a lot of, other examples of where, that quality aspect is even Nas's last album, right? I mean, that was just like kind of like largely like a straight hip hop project, right? Like there wasn't anything that was, in my opinion, that was really like heavily shooting for, social media, like TikTok virality or anything like that, right? I mean, it was just like a good hip hop album. So I think that's the good news, is that it seems like we are moving back towards the quality aspect of that. I think when it comes to like, the music biz as a whole, I mean, it's just a really good question that I'm not sure I have like kind of like the final answer for. I mean, I think if we continue to see the trend of like music discovery happening outside of streaming platforms, because I think I can't remember what the stat that I saw was, but there's a huge amount of music discovery happening on TikTok, right? Whether that's catalog music or whether it's new, kind of releases. And I saw someone from Spotify, I think, had been hired to like head up like, catalog music at, TikTok or whatever it was. And it's just like they're realizing that this is how we essentially get people, to discover music. So if we continue to go that way, I think, we're probably going to still see like kind of like the bloated, some of the bloated kind of, projects, because ultimately you're just trying to hit on one thing. But I think if it really depends on how the music business kind of continues to evolve over these, these coming years. It's a tough one. That's probably the toughest one. I hope so, because, it'd be nice to like go back and listen to, hip hop albums that came out 3 years ago. But like, I mean, I can't even. I'm trying to think of an example there, of a project that dropped 3 years ago that I'm like jumping back to. I mean, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, for me, that's why like I brought up the 444 example, is like that is encapsulates like, what a good quality product is, because I was playing it the other day. That came out in 2017, right? And it just so happens it's Jay. I mean, not just so happens. I mean, obviously you're always going to go back to Jay albums, but like even even some of Nas's recent stuff, like I can't say I go back to that album that he dropped on Good Music, and I mean, I go back.
No.
Oh, well, yeah.
We're not going back to that, Adam. I love Nas, but no, we're not going back to that.
but I mean, even
come back to the King's Disease albums. Well, they came out last year and this year, but
yeah. But I mean, I'm more just saying like that music isn't that old, right? But you still go listen to, like, I'll still go listen to like Ready to Die. Like,
right.
I mean, there's a problem. Like, there's a disconnect here, right? Like all I'm getting at, and that it had nothing to do with the amount of songs on the project, right? It had to do with the quality of the music, and I use that example outside of hip hop, right? Like, I mean, that's the reason why like Adele is going to do crazy numbers, because it's timeless music, right? Like, it's why people still go back and listen to like Motown and stuff like that, right? It's just, there's something to be said for creating good product because it ultimately extends the life of it and you can drive more. It's this whole like fast food thing that the music business become. It's actually like a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah.
Because it's quick hits, it's quick return, but you are not creating a sustainable business long term. And this is the exact same thing that happened when we went from physical music sales to downloads, and they tried to fight downloads and they tried to fight, all of this stuff. And it's like they're going to find themselves at a certain point again where something else is going to happen, and all of the eggs have been put in this like kind of quick return basket. And I don't know where that's going to leave things.
Yeah,
I mean, look, this is kind of like aggregation to sports media now, Dex. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Like a lot of it, but a lot of it, that's what it is. It's like a lot of people are just going for like what's now, what's in the moment or whatever. Like to your point about going back to albums, I'm thinking of some of the albums that I went back to just in general recently, and I went back to Helter Skelter's first album because I saw some Sean Price shit just popped up in my Instagram the other day, and then I just went back to it to hear it. I went back to Erykah Badu's second album. I went back to, I'm sure I went back to
like Beanie's like rock, first two Rockefeller albums. I mean,
I was bumping those the other day. Actually,
Freeze out, Freeway's album. I mean, you could just like it's kind of wild how the list kind of like just goes on and on and on from that, call it like kind of the physical format era, right? Cams like rock out, like I mean Purple Haze, and like it's just, it goes on, it's endless. But then what happens is once you get over to the streaming era, it's not endless. It's almost like it's almost not there, like in a sense, right?
Of the stuff that I really go back to, I would say like 2012 is probably the cutoff, because that's where like Life is Good and Good Kid, Mad City came out, and that was like a really good year all around. There's a bunch of other stuff that came out that year, but a lot of the stuff that I would really go back to, probably, unless it's like recent, it's probably not a lot after like 2012.
I like that mark of 2012 because I feel like that's kind of a place for me too, where we kind of saw the shift in the last 9 years, and I would say there's less stuff in that period that I go back to as more, maybe outside of like To Pimp a Butterfly, go back to a lot. You talked about 444, Adam. I think those are albums I really still go back to and listen to in their entirety. I definitely agree with that. And then you brought this up in your article. You said that it's unlikely any change in album lengths will happen quickly. I mean, this was a great stat. This was an interesting stat to me. If all the albums that hit number one on the Billboard Top Rap Album charts in 2021, only one, J. Cole's The Off Season, is less than 40 minutes long. Right. And so it's crazy. It shows you how few people are actually making shorter albums. My thing, though, is you talk Vince Staples, you talk J. Cole, you can see there's some success there for those artists. I think we'd all agree when Kendrick's next project drops, it's probably not going to be a long one. He generally doesn't do that. So there are artists who have had success in this. It's intriguing to me why people haven't done more. But before we get you out of here, Adam, wanted to ask you, what are some of your favorite hip hop albums of all time? Maybe do you have some recently? We always do an end of the year hip hop award show. What are some of your favorite hip hop albums, or what are some of your favorite hip hop albums for 2021?
Yeah, man, I can do anything outside of 2021. I'm just playing around. I think the Donda album's incredible. I mean, for me, like, it's starting to like, I mean, and I hate when people say, oh, this is the dopest album since whatever, when it came out like 3 weeks ago. But for me, it's starting to creep up like the Kanye album list. Like there is some incredible material on there, which is great to see in 2021. And then going back in the day, I mean, man, like, Blueprint and Reasonable Doubt. And I think In My Lifetime Volume 1 is like super underrated, right, in Jay's catalog. I mean, my favorite Jay-Z song of all time is on that album, right? Lucky Me, which I think is one of the most underrated Jay songs. And then like, Cam's like Come Home With Me, like Purple Haze. I mean, all the rock stuff from back in the day. I mean, I love, won't get into this discussion now, but I love the Slim Shady LP. I love the Marshall Mathers LP. That's kind of where it stops for me. From
we agree with you. We agree with you here, so don't feel bad.
I extend it to the Eminem show, and then I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something, it's wild. It's a good example, right? Like just when we were talking about like going back to albums and stuff, and for whatever reason, I don't go back to that album, as much. But I mean, that's and then it was written, and life after death, and ready to die. I mean, I remember, and I was 13 or whatever, and I had that cassette. The cassette was just, after a while, it was just black on both sides, right?
Yep.
All the writing had come off, and I mean, it's just wild when you think about the quality of material that was produced. But Nipsey, Victory Lap, is another one that's a little more of recent memory that I think is just, I think it's about, as close to a modern day, classic as we have, for so many reasons, just very, very impactful on so many levels. And and I mean, current day, I mean, like I mentioned, the Donda album, I mean, I love Griselda and Benny, and but yeah, man, it's a lot of interesting things going on today, music industry as a whole, and hip hop as a whole. So I just hope it gets back to a little more quality over quantity is kind of what I hope to see.
I hope so too. So I guess we'll wrap with this, Adam. Are changes in the length of the album, is this just all part of hip hop evolution? Is this what we should expect? Because you've talked about how hip hop has kind of followed the trends of whatever the industry was, right? Whether it was, streaming, TikTok now. So is this something we could see, fluctuate from time to time just based on whatever the trends are? Hip hop evolves, and it always evolves in different forms. So is this just something we should expect?
I mean, I think it's less about hip hop specifically and more about the music biz. I think, we potentially see those, kind of those ebbs and flows in the music biz. But I just go back to I think the root of, of hip hop is about, saying something. That's kind of what I feel, right? And I think when you start getting to 23, 24 tracks in length, or these really long, almost 2-hour albums and stuff, I mean, you could be the greatest MC of all time, but I'm not sure anybody has that much important stuff to say, or has the ability to create as impactful and as interesting songs as needed to fill almost 2 hours of music, right? So I think it's about where will the music biz continue to evolve to, and I think it's at a bit of a interestingly, I think it's at a bit of a crossroads again, because revenues have recovered and the industry is healthy, but interestingly, the music biz find itself in the same place that it found itself when downloading starting to come into play. Is the music business has not invented anything innovative, right? It is the tech companies that have created the new music delivery mechanisms. And again, the industry is at the mercy of what happens next, right? Instead of being the ones to create what happens next. So I think all of this will be dictated where the industry goes, but I think hip hop will continue to evolve into itself, and hopefully that evolve that we're seeing is going back towards more quality, more social commentary, more meaningful meaningful lyrics and meaningful music.
I hope so, Adam. I really, really, really do. That is Adam Aziz, freelance writer. Please check out his article on the Undefeated, the coming battle over rap album lengths. It's really good. It also has a bunch of other good stuff. Adam, we talk a lot of hip hop on this podcast. We'd love for you to come back on anytime, because we talk a lot about it through the years. So we got to have you back on the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. We appreciate you, man.
That'd be dope, man. I have a lot to say, so happy to come back anytime.
Appreciate you. Thanks, brother. Take care.
Cool, guys. Take care.
All right, so that's it for this episode of the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. Special thank you to our guest, Adam Aziz. Really great time talking with him. Also, so glad we got to talk to you guys about that fight. It was really good. Brian and I talked about looking forward to that next fight with Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter. Definitely looking forward to that one. A lot more to talk about in the world of sports. Remember, go support Brian and all the digital content that he will be creating for FanDuel. Also, check out the first episode, season 4 of the Sports Walk. More to come. A lot more good content to come. NBA season starts next week, baby.
Yes.
I'm ready to go. A lot to talk about regarding that. But for episode 196, you can see how much more excited Brian will be at the next episode when we're at 197. His excitement level should go through the roof. We'll see that. For Brian Fonseca, I'm Dexter Henry. Until next time, y'all. Peace.